Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another Clifton Cameras camera review. We've relocated from the southwest of England, I'm unsure if you can tell, and we've decided to come to Marrakesh in Morocco. Marrakesh features great food, vibrant markets, and beautiful architecture, so what better location to film a review on a brand new flagship model camera from Olympus, the EM1X. So what are the key features of the EM1X? Well, we have the improved professional build quality and design, in-body USB charging, which reportedly can be done in only 2 hours. We have dual SD card slots, dual processors now, one for processing images, and a whole TruePic 8 processor dedicated to autofocus. We have multiple AF modes, which are relatively impressive. Relatively, I say they are very impressive. Improved image quality and handheld high-res shooting, an inbuilt live ND filter, and video improvements. This larger body houses an improved heatsink. We've also now got OM log and improved 4K shooting ability. When this camera hits the market, it's going to hit the market with a price of $2,799. Now there will be a £200 trade-in bonus up until March 15th to sweeten the deal. But that is a respectable entry point price when you consider that this camera should be measured against the 1DX, the Nikon D5, the Nikon D850, and the Sony A9. I can already see the snide YouTube comments, but for that money you could buy a full frame that or a Sony this. Sure, but then I would need a bigger budget for bigger lenses, a bigger bag to carry my bigger lenses in, and a larger hard drive for my bigger files. If you're heavily invested in full frame, it suits your workflow and that's what makes sense for you, then that's fantastic. If APS-C is the epitome of what you want, the A6500, if that makes happy your proverbial clam, then fantastic. We're here to deliver the facts and we're much more interested in what a camera does well rather than what it doesn't do at all. I just want to reiterate for probably a third time that this camera is not a replacement for the EM1 Mark II. That camera will still hold its position in the market and should probably be compared to something more like the Fujifilm X-T3. This is a standalone product intended to fill the shoes for Olympus that the 1DX2 and the 5D fill for Canon and Nikon. I feel the need to justify this because I'm fighting an uphill battle for the Micro Four Thirds system against those folks who believe that full frame is full frame and nothing else can compare. We draw this comparison because it delivers on all of the same points as these cameras, except for one, the sensor size, which isn't a huge deal. Much like the 1DX Mark II, this camera now possesses dual processors, one solely dedicated to driving the autofocus system. The shutter has also been tested to 400,000 shutter actuations. This is the same benchmark used by the Nikon D5 and the Canon 1DX. Both of those cameras are also tested to the 400,000 benchmark. This camera is rugged. It is IPX1 rated. The only weak point, actually, is the lenses. Now that's not to say that they're not robust in their own right and are very suitable for shooting in tough, harsh weather conditions and are weather sealed, but without the lenses, it's actually rated an IPX3 camera. You could pretty much dunk this thing in water or hose it down and it would be fine. All you gotta do is slap the body cap on. While this camera shares the same sensor as the Olympus EM1 Mark II, they have been able to squeeze out better performance in terms of high dynamic range, compression, on just about every facet of the camera due to the fact that they've split the workload between two processors. They have two TruePic 8 processors inside of this camera, one of which is solely dedicated to autofocus and the other is dedicated to performing the other functions of the camera. You can see why that would give you an additional edge in terms of performance, because the workload is now of the autofocus system, which is a heavy workload, is being given to a completely different processor, which means that the initial processor has all that extra capacity to deal with the demands of the camera. With this system, we're able to achieve better balance when shooting with long focal length lenses. This is largely due to the professional build quality and ergonomics of the camera. The additional weight added by the 2-battery vertical grip better counteracts, say, the weight of the 300mm f4 that I have here. Let's talk about this newfangled autofocus system. While other cameras are complete with many more focus points, like the Sony a7 III, those are primarily phase detect autofocus points, so though they cover some 90 to 100% of the frame, and there are several hundred of them, the 121 autofocus points featured on the Olympus EM1X are all cross-type focus points. Now, there may only be 121 of them covering 80% of the frame, but with their own processor and them all being cross-type, they are hyper accurate. The EM1X has a new autofocus mode called Intelligent Subject Detect Autofocus. And right now it comes with 3 preloaded subjects: automobiles, trains, and planes. And what it does when this mode is activated is very impressive. It will detect multiple cars within that frame and focus on each of them to give you the best possible focus, and it will do it while you're shooting high continuous speeds. I have it on good authority from Olympus that they will be adding further subjects to this system with later firmware updates. It reportedly requires an immense amount of effort to create the recognition this camera has for these subjects. Olympus has said that it requires 10,000 images of each subject in order to accurately calibrate the camera's autofocus system to detect them. Now, this camera has very similar frame rates as the EM1 II. With the mechanical shutter, you can expect to get 15 frames per second with single autofocus. You can expect to get 10 frames per second while using continuous autofocus. Similarly, with the electronic shutter, you can get up to 60 frames per second with an electronic single autofocus lock-on, and also 18 frames per second while using continuous autofocus. Though those things are very similar, the additional processor has given us some expanded ability in terms of our buffer. You'll have to excuse our location change to the top of the riad because I think our hosts were trying to get on with their daily duties of cleaning the riad, and we were sort of getting in their way, so we decided to move to the roof instead. A lovely location to continue filming. A greatly improved buffer now has the capacity to deal with 287 images in RAW. And the Pro Capture feature we originally saw on the EM1 II, that once recorded up to 14 frames with a half press before fully pressing the shutter down at the decisive moment, now records up to 35 frames instead. This has to be the most forgiving camera on the market. Also, unlike the EM1 II, while the camera is writing all this information to the card, we still have full functionality of the camera, so you're not stood around while you're waiting for the card to write. This also wouldn't be a proper mirrorless camera review if we didn't make a huge deal out of the fact that this camera has not one, but 2 card slots, and they are both UHS 2 card slots, compared to the EM1 II's paltry single UHS 2 card slot and additional UHS 1 card slot. So that is a marked advantage in 2018/19. While this is a sample model and we are waiting for official numbers from Olympus, we have been told that this camera has a full stop of improvement in low light photography and an improvement in high dynamic range that has yet to be quantified. But we know that the EM1 Mark II gave us a full 13.1 stops of dynamic range, and that is exceptional for a Micro Four Thirds camera, so the improvement on this is really just an additional sweetener. Some of the best image stabilization on the market has been improved upon with the new addition of a new gyroscope mechanism in the camera body, which not only gives you that left and right roll and the front and backward sort of tilt, but a sort of gyroscopic movement like this, I guess. And you can now achieve 7.5 stops of image stabilization with the right setup. A portion of that is dependent on the lens that you're using, but irregardless of the lens, you're still getting a full 6 stops of stabilization directly from the camera body. Using that improved image stabilization technology, we are now able to use the high-res photo mode that was featured on the EM1 Mark II on the EM1X, but we are able to use it handheld. And apparently we should be able to shoot images down to 1/15 of a second. Now there are 2 different modes for high-res photo. The first is a tripod mode in which the camera will shoot 8 images. The second is the handheld mode, and that will shoot 16 images. Now I assume that it shoots 16 images in order to compensate for any additional movement that it doesn't pick up and compensate for using the image stabilization when you're shooting handheld. You will need a little bit more patience with that mode, and it's probably not the best thing to use if you're shooting maybe moving subjects or portraiture, because it will take some time for it to compile those images and write them to the card. This camera has a new feature called a Live ND filter, which is an electronic feature of the camera where it allows you to sort of develop your longer exposure shots, and you can view them developing live on the back of the camera using the LCD, so you can decide when you want to start and stop that exposure. That Live ND gives you sort of additional flexibility, though it isn't likely suitable for ultra long exposures. Now I want to talk about video settings. This camera won't likely feature as your A camera, but it may be a very good B camera. You can now shoot C4K at 24 frames a second. That's a 237 megabit per second bitrate. And you can also get full HD at up to 120 frames a second. Not too slouchy for what's intended to be a photography camera. The Olympus now brings OM log to the table in a format we've seen before in log 400 files, giving us the ability to grade our video footage from this camera. The large body and improved heatsink within means you'll have no trouble with overheating, and you'll be able to shoot 4K till your heart's content. The camera and its now integrated vertical grip features 2 1720 mAh BLH1 batteries. I think these are the same batteries used on the EM1 Mark II. And it charges using a USB-C cable, which means you can charge it on the go. And using that USB-C cable, these 2 batteries will now charge in a reported 2 hours, which is a welcome addition, as we've been expecting rapid charge on our mobile devices for some time. So it's going to be awesome to get that similar technology in a camera. Well, thank you for joining us in Marrakesh. If you want to stay informed and see future Clifton Cameras content, be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that bell ding-a-ling if you want to get alerts when new videos come up. You'll definitely be interested in seeing what we're up to next week.